With a lot of hype and negative headlines around ChatGPT and other AI tools, we started wondering whether there's actual value in the technology for companies. On this episode of Today in Tech, we're going to find out what businesses are really doing with AI. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Shaw. Welcome to Today in Tech. Joining me on the show today is AJ Mohan. He is a principal of AI and analytics at Capgemini. Welcome, AJ.
Thanks. Happy to be on, Keith.
You guys did the Capgemini Research Institute recently published a report about how companies are deploying generative AI tools such as ChatGPT and others. Tell us about sort of the motivation behind the report, and was there anything that surprised you about the results? Because when I went through the report, there were a couple of surprising things to me, but I want to hear what you guys thought about it.
Yeah, so the motivation behind the report was, I think it's fairly obvious, especially since, probably around November or December of last year, the interest in generative AI has exploded on the market. There's a number of tools were released that sort of, and a number of public-facing products were released that really kind of captured a lot of people's imaginations. And we found that a lot of our client conversations were being driven by sort of the kind of the interest and the excitement around generative AI. So I think from Capgemini's perspective, the Research Institute's perspective made perfect sense. This was a survey of, we conducted a survey of around 1,000 organizations across the globe. Mm-hmm. We talked about their executives from multiple industries, areas like consumer goods, retail, financial service. The idea here is to get an industry wide perspective on how these executives are looking at generative AI. Obviously we'd love to work with them on that journey, but really importantly, just also showing, some of the commonalities and comparisons.
Yeah. So in terms of what surprised you, it did feel like that there was a very high number of optimism around it. And sometimes you would think that there's skepticism around a new technology, especially one that can be kind of polarizing with Gen AI.
Yeah, so that is that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from that report, which is, almost 100% of organizations that we've spoken with, all of them are having some level of conversation in their, executive meetings or boardrooms around Gen AI. But to your other point, just the the sheer majority of executives that believe, that Gen AI is going to bring benefits to their company or going to bring tangible and, improvements in their process or revenue drivers, was really surprising. And usually when you talk about new approaches for AI or machine learning, you don't get that sort of widespread, positivity. Certainly, certain industries might be more positive than others, but in this case, just there's a tremendous amount of excitement is really the best way to put it in terms of how generative AI can kind of enhance every aspect of a company's business operations.
Yeah, and another interesting part about sort of the overall part of the survey was that many of them felt that it was not going to be disruptive to their industry. And that made me think, well, it feels like everything that you read, it is going to be disruptive. And so I was wondering whether you felt from the responses that executives might not have understood what the word disruptive means, or do they just sort of put that in the corner, seeing that, like, they see almost like the gold chest, but they don't see the dragon next to it? That was sort of the analogy I came up with. Are they just ignoring sort of maybe the disruption part, or do they not understand what the definition of disruptive means? Because it could be that too.
Yeah, I don't think they're ignoring the concept of disruption. I think a lot of these executives and that we've spoken with, they look at it as enhancements to their existing business. It's how do you optimize existing operational flows? They don't see it as a disruptor in the sense of replacing entire areas of business that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously the future is, that could happen in the future in certain industries and whatnot. But really, the key takeaway is they're looking at it as sort of optimizers to their existing workflows as opposed to a disruptor of their specific businesses.
Okay.
And that's why they're kind of taking that positive approach to it.
And then you broke it down in sort of the questions that you asked them in terms of what areas of generative AI are the most relevant to business. So tell me about the top answers where most businesses see them using generative AI or GPT tools.
No, absolutely. So a lot of the areas right now, the sort of the most sort of understood use cases of generative AI, I'll say, is things like potentially marketing and customer insights and personalization around generating content. A lot of clients are interested in areas like customer service. So, for example, having more intelligent virtual assistants, chatbots, but also assistance to customer support reps to better understand client insights.
Yeah.
And, certainly there's the whole area around things like code generation, code assistance, where a lot of, product companies or development companies are interested in seeing if it can accelerate the workflow of their developers. So really, when you look at the initial scope of use cases, and certainly these can expand in the future, but people look at it from a perspective of either user experience or customer experience, marketing. In a lot of cases, customers are interested in knowledge management, which is essentially aggregating the content across organizations, enabling a user to actually find content without digging through, different sites or different portals. And then there's this sort of back-end use case on coding, coding optimization, things like user acceptance testing, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It was interesting in the survey that coding generated about 50% of interest from those surveyed, compared with higher numbers for things like chatbots, data, text search, that kind of stuff. It does feel like they're going after the low-hanging fruit right now, and maybe coding, there are still some questions about accuracy and maybe time to develop a program like that. And a lot of companies they say, well, it's easier to just grab the chatbot stuff quickly and the search because there's so much out there, where it might be a longer term project for coding and things like that. Or do you think there might be some doubt from companies about its ability to replace coders, or not replace, but enhance coding capabilities?
I mean, I think there's always going to be caution when you're talking about mission critical applications of your business, right? If you're a product company, for example, and you're developing software, obviously you want to be very, careful about ensuring, the accuracy of the work product, or, not taking any shortcuts, that sort of thing. So there's always, when we talk about companies that invest heavily in coding, product companies are top of mind. There's always going to be that, a little bit of wariness to make sure, hey, we don't want to just dive right into it because this is such a critical part of our operations. To your point, some of the other use cases are lower hanging in the sense of they're relatively straightforward to implement into a workflow. But also there's already some, a lot of demonstrated applications of it in those areas, things like, virtual assistants, chatbots. So that's why I think, when you talk about a lot of customers are looking into the coding aspects, but I can see that being more of just taking it a little bit slower to make sure that their primary business isn't getting not disrupted, but like influenced negatively by just, kind of throwing generative AI.
Yeah. There was another example of something that scored high on the list in terms of what companies want to do with generative AI, and that's in the generation of synthetic data. Can you explain what that is? And as I was doing some more research on it, there were some other red flags that kind of popped up, but I want to talk to you a little bit about that. Tell me about what it is for AI generating synthetic data, because as soon as you tell someone that, they go, well, that doesn't sound good. So tell me why there's such an interest there.
Yeah, so the concept of synthetic data generation has actually been around for decades.
Okay.
It's a way to effectively train or test models that you develop in order, where there might not be enough or sufficient data for detecting certain, issues or classifying certain data sets. And ways of generating synthetic data, generative AI in and of its as a concept has been around for a long time. Synthetic data creation as a concept has been around. But the idea here is you're using an AI or machine learning model to generate data that's very similar to, from like a structure and a statistical perspective, to actual data, but not exactly the same. And once again, that's usually the ways that a lot of people try to leverage that is obviously getting much more data to be able to train and test their models, but also potentially obfuscating certain data elements. So you want to replicate real world data as much as possible, but you don't want to use potentially exact proprietary data. Mm-hmm. You want to obfuscate that. So from that perspective, those are usually where we see the synthetic data generation come in. Synthetic data isn't just tabular data. You can be talking about video, you can be talking about audio, imagery, as well as structured and unstructured data. And so that's where a lot of clients are also looking at it. I think they look at it from a perspective of, if I don't have enough data for actually building like an effective model, mm-hmm. how can I get to that data without investing obviously millions or hundreds of millions of dollars and trying to procure it the old-fashioned way.
Is there a danger, though, of companies that invest into synthetic data and then use that data to then train their AI, and it gets into a situation where it's almost like you're photocopying a photocopy and a photocopy, and it gets to the point where it gets muddled? There was an article this week that I saw about that sort of effect, that as AI starts training itself on AI-generated data, and this might be in the image space or the video space, and eventually after like 5 or 6 iterations, you just get something that is a blob of a mess. And I'm hoping that companies understand the proper use of synthetic data, or is it just the fact that synthetic means fake or means made up, and that might be throwing some fear into the situation too? Set me on the right course, I guess I'm asking you.
No, for sure. So you're in terms of what you pointed out, sort of that photocopy of a photocopy concept, it's absolutely correct. Without the proper guardrails or training guidelines, that is a scenario that can happen if you just sort of leverage generative AI without understanding some of the underpinnings of it. I think, there is also a lot of concern around things like if you are you're generating synthetic data based on some real world data, you have the risk of always pulling in biases, pulling in like anomalies that are not normal, but mm-hmm. that might get inflated as normal. So there's a lot of sort of those checkpoints that you have to consider when generating synthetic data, and it's it's good for certain scenarios where you're, potentially looking at, something a little bit more objective, like a process or like you're measuring, for example, like IoT measurements to predict, failure of mechanical parts as an example.
Yep.
But then there's other cases where if you're looking at either subjective data or more, kind of mission critical applications, those would be, you would be careful about leveraging synthetic data because it can absorb a lot of those, potentially those any biases or preconceived notions or any other imbalances in the data is how we kind of look at it. And it can just pass it off as a normal iteration of data.
Yeah. And you mentioned risk a couple seconds ago, and there was another part of the survey that I wanted to talk about was it looks to me as if the companies were downplaying a lot of the risks associated with Gen I. One of the questions was that 74% said they believe the benefits of AI outweigh the risks. And I wanted to ask you, is this a case where companies might not understand a bunch of the risks, like the things you just brought up with bias and potential of data getting morphed into this weird blob type thing? Or do you feel that companies they're still confident that the risks will be minimized or solved down the road, or at least, they understand the risks and they're just confident of the benefits? Do you know what I'm saying? Is it one or the other, or is it a mixture of both?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of it's more of the latter, where, a lot of the risks there's some very obvious and clear risks to process that you have to at least be aware of and correct for. I think most companies and executives are aware of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't just be, throwing a lot of effort into Gen AI. Mm-hmm. I think the general sense is positivity that, it'll get mitigated as not just these Gen AI models evolve, but also as workflows evolve, as they're able to more effectively leverage this in their organization. I think they're counting on actually implementing those guardrails, implementing those steps to capture it. So it's one of those issues where, it's a new technology in terms of overall, time frame. It's comparatively untested. I think a lot of executives are aware of some of the risks of AI as in general, but also Gen AI, and it's they're expecting that as it evolves over the next several years, those are going to get mitigated by better models or better guardrails to those models.
Yeah. And another point in the survey that I thought was very interesting was companies are recognizing that Gen AI might bump up against other efforts in the company, especially around sustainability. Because AI projects have such a big carbon footprint, it almost feels like there's going to be bumping heads where a Gen AI project might go up against a sustainability project. And can those two factors work together? Or is it going to be a case of where a company goes, well, we're getting so much benefit from this Gen AI stuff that we may have to reduce our climate goals or our ESG goals or anything like that for sustainability, that might go off to the side?
No, they absolutely can work together. When we talk about Gen AI, we're not talking about one specific vendor or one specific model or approach. We're talking about a whole suite of tools and solutions that are out there on the market. And there's many ways to try and reduce the carbon footprint of those things, whether it's using more of a foundational model and training that on a smaller data set and using less computation power, that sort of thing. There's a lot of ways you can help mitigate the cost by creating more optimized generative AI models for specific use cases. So it's not a sense of it's one generative AI model to rule them all, and then you just throw that one model at everything.
Yeah.
It's going to be a situation. It's going to be a situation where you have a suite of tools to use. either different products or different companies, and you have to pick and choose the right one for your specific use case. And that can come down to, obviously, cost is going to be a huge consideration, but also, things like how, whether you need it real time, near real time, where you want that compute to happen. There's a lot of different considerations along that chain that you can absolutely, figure it into your sustainability goals, or at least minimizing the footprint of generative AI models without just saying, oh, well, if I'm not willing to, I can't use generative AI if I'm not willing to sacrifice my sustainability, or vice versa. I don't think it's a black and white answer.
Well, and I'm very impressed with the fact that you guys asked that question, or that there was enough of an awareness out there of the cost of some of these Gen AI projects that would have an impact. I think sometimes maybe companies might ignore some of that in the sense of, well, we're still going to do our sustainability efforts. Just ignore the big cost and the carbon footprint over here. So it's good that a lot of companies are at least recognizing that. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about you've done a lot of work at Capgemini with a lot of these companies deploying some of these AI projects. I'm not going to ask you specific projects or product names or companies like that, but can you give me a sense of some of the examples of where companies are seeing some success? Give me some examples of projects that are initially working.
Yeah. So, speaking broadly, we see the areas where we see, interest in these companies, as well as where they're investing some of their time. Knowledge management, like you mentioned, is a huge area where, we know a lot of companies are working on in terms of aggregating their knowledge base. It could be one specific business function, things like, I'm just giving an example, like looking at potentially like a user portal, like potentially looking at benefits, or looking at some other section all the way through that more, kind of that more, the broader sort of search assistant. Mm-hmm. Knowledge management is a big area that clients are definitely investing in. Things like content creation and for marketing, or content personalization. That's another area where we see a lot of clients kind of expressing interest, given the rapid scale. Given all of these sources like social media and everything. How do we customize content for our customers, for our end users? And then to your point, there's a lot of clients who are, even though they're taking, to your point, a measured approach to it, they're very much interested in some of those code generation or automated things like A/B testing, automations that can help them with their workflows. So, not getting into a specific client's details, usually we are seeing a lot of traction in those spaces, and that's how a lot of clients, this is reflective of the broader industry too, but those are the ones that they're really honing in on for Gen AI, saying, okay, can it, essentially speed up the process of things like knowledge management, or generating some insights for me that otherwise I would have to poke around to 6 different sources. Those are the areas that we are seeing a lot of interest and engagement.
Does it do a good job of generating insights? Like if I had 6 reports and I asked the AI to generate a summary of those 6 reports, or would the prompt be more like find an insight within this? Like do you find that it does a good job of it, or does it just sort of give you a generic kind of bland response? I've tried it with summarizing certain articles or creative types of things, and I don't find that it's very creative. But on the summary part, I feel like it does do a relatively good job of summarizing large reports.
Yeah. So that's a really great question, and I want to be very clear on differentiating it. So generative AI, when we say generative AI, specifically, we're talking about large language models that, have been released the last 8 months or so.
Yep.
They are not computational models.
Okay.
They are not, they cannot inherently in and of themselves do complex calculations, or, and in a lot of cases, a basic calculator can do a better job at mathematics than they can.
Yeah.
So you have to understand these are they're language models, and their whole idea is to help predict the next word. So you give an input and it says, okay, based on this input, statistically, here's what the output, what they're looking for as an output. So that is definitely a clear differentiator. Generative AI doesn't replace more traditional AI or machine learning computational models.
Mm-hmm,
Those absolutely have to, still be in play. Because it's a different tool. It's not the right tool for that job.
Okay.
Generative AI, what it can do is it can potentially be an orchestrator of that. So to your point, it's not creating those insights, but potentially either summarizing those insights or knowing where to go to grab that information, which data source if the information is already there.
Yep.
And that opens up a lot of possibilities. So, it speeds up people's workflow. So traditionally where someone might be looking at, 3 or 4 or 5 dashboards and trying to piece together information, at least if you ask a question, generative AI can go and say, okay, this is the dashboard with that information. I'm going to pull it out. So that's really the key differentiator there.
Okay. And in your experience with working with a lot of these companies, are they still taking a good job? Are they doing a good job of working with the technology, or does it still feel like the Wild West, or just throw something against the wall and see what sticks? Do you feel like companies do they know what they're doing at this point, or are they still in that very early experimental phase?
I wouldn't categorize it as Wild West, because I think most companies wouldn't invest as heavily if that were the case. I think it's still experimental in the sense of, certain companies have already adopted Gen AI solutions, but a lot of them are figuring out where the best value proposition for it is in. Mm-hmm. And we already talked about sort of those areas that a lot of our clients have expressed interest in. Or they're investing in. So within those, they're looking at, things like when you look at knowledge management, are we going to look at one specific set of data? Are we going to look at multiple data sets? So from that perspective, and then how do we build an effective model to capture either that data or multiple data sets, or how do we orchestrate multiple models together? That's just an example, but that is effectively experimental, because you're still trying to build the most optimal version. But I think a lot of companies and our customers that we see too are doing it in a measured way. They want to make sure they're not throwing just something at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Okay. They're
going through the business process of identifying, here's potentially where generative AI can be helpful.
Yep.
And that whole process of identifying those business cases, identifying the value add for AI and Gen AI is very valuable. Yeah. And they're still investing in that, because they don't want to throw like a ton of money at something they have no idea what it's good for.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you see companies leaning more towards internal facing projects and applications, or more public facing, external? Is it 50-50?
We see both. Some of the examples I cited to you, like the marketing and personalization is very much customer facing. A lot of clients are interested in like call center AI, which is sort of like a more intelligent chatbot, which can speak to customers more naturally and understand sort of their history. But also on the internal side, really a lot of, those knowledge management cases, for example, or those virtual assistants, those are generally internally focused, in the sense of, they're for the employees to better enhance their workflows. Obviously, things like the code generation aspect. But once again, that's internal focus. So really, we're seeing an interest in both areas. How can we? So on the customer side, it's essentially how can we increase things like sales, retention, customer satisfaction. On the internal side, you're really seeing, operational processes. How can this make our people more efficient with their work?
Do you see companies currently looking at ROI of their projects, or is it still too early to start wondering whether all of these efforts are going to start paying off at some point?
I think we're still at a phase where ROI isn't, it isn't completely clearly measured yet.
Yeah.
And you have to go through it. And the truth is, it's sort of like a chicken or the egg thing, right? Like, you have to be able to build some of these experiments to measure ROI, but you need to know the ROI to more invest in like these experiments. So it's not, that's a feature, not a flaw of the process. But in terms of very clear ROI, certainly there's a perception, and I think the report covers a lot of potential sales uplifts and all that stuff. What the actual numbers are going to be and what that's going to shake out to can only happen after clients have started using this in their day-to-day work, and they're able to quantify the outcomes.
Do you see companies and executives giving the Gen AI group a little bit more leeway than maybe they would give other technologies or other projects at this point?
They generally, so yes. I mean, the way it happens is, a lot of clients, there's always a lot of job postings going on out there for Gen AI leaders. Essentially people who understand how these models operate and how, and to explore how to implement it in their organization. And that's just indicative of a lot of clients companies don't want to be left behind in the process. So they're investing up front in at least some leadership, or sort of executive presence in the space. Mm-hmm. And then the idea there is, they'll invest a little more rapidly than some of the other traditional AI or ML software solutions, because the perception is those traditional solutions are more of like, hey, this is going to fix a specific problem. So, that business function or that business line would invest in that particular product. Whereas I think a lot of enterprises are taking like a whole of enterprise approach to this. Like generative AI can be applied everywhere.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, they're looking at it as an upfront investment. I think they are looking at it. They're looking for guidance from their either from their partners or vendors, or from their internal leadership to drive new use cases.
Okay, and
so short answer, yes.
Yeah, and within the next 6 months to a year, where do you see a lot of companies taking this approach? Is it continued experimentation? Do you start seeing more deployments and new projects, or just getting to that point where to see whether this stuff is actually going to work and stick?
I think if you're talking about timescales in like a year or more, I mean, you kind of have to see new deployments. Otherwise, there's going to be Gen AI fatigue, right? No company is going to invest, just millions of dollars without any tangible outcome for a long period of time. Certainly certainly we're in that phase where there's like you kind of call it the hype phase, but the reality is the list of use cases or potential use cases that clients are exploring is way up there.
Yeah.
But in the long term, it's likely going to mature and settle into, a smaller subset of use cases that generative AI can truly truly change or revolutionize.
Yeah.
And that's that same, hammer looking for a nail analogy. Like you want to first find those nails before you start applying the hammer to it. So that's what I think. As the companies become more aware and they build that expertise in-house or through partners, they're going to start understanding that, okay, well, we thought originally this use case would be super valuable, but the reality is it's this other use case. And they're going to throw more money at that. But yeah, I mean, I think in a year, certainly there should be many more enterprise scale deployments of generative AI, either for specific business functions or in the enterprise as a whole, depending on the company.
All right. So right now, companies are just looking for those nails.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's some pretty clear nails in the process. We already talked about it.
Yeah.
But there's, it's like even moving beyond that, it's like a specific, it's like even within that subset of nails, it's like, are there specific types of nails which are better suited for our business?
Okay. Sub nails. Or the hidden nails.
Like brass nail, like, drywall screws versus, wood nails and stuff.
All right. Thanks, AJ, for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Keith.
All right.
It was great chatting with you.
That's all the time we have for today's episode. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and add any comments that you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.